understand you've had some issues in the past with night terrors, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So Ethan, when he was 6, it was last year, so in the last 12 months, it was in the Christmas holidays, and to begin with, he just used to wake up, come downstairs and seem sad. So I just assumed he'd had a bad dream or something had happened. We'd give him a cuddle, take him back up to bed, he'd go back to sleep. So that would happen every evening, but not for he wasn't awake or wasn't downstairs for very long, and then he'd go back to sleep. And then it started, so I thought it was the Christmas holidays. I assumed he was very overstimulated and probably had too much sugar. We had people staying with us for the holidays and just things were out of routine or different. So just put it down to that. I thought once we're back into routines, back into school patterns, things will settle down. And then it just got worse. So it started being every evening rather than every couple of days. He would come down and it kind of amplified itself, where he would come down really scared. We started realising that he wasn't actually awake because he was asking for me, and I was right there. He would seem really distressed. He would run from one end of the room to the other, back and forth. Terrified is the best way I can describe it. He seemed really distressed, really upset, asking for me, and there would be times where we could get him back to his room and get him to lie down and try and tell him that he was safe and that we were here, that he wasn't on his own. Sometimes that just didn't work. Sometimes it did, sometimes he did hear us, I suppose, and you could get through whatever was going on, and other times you just couldn't at all, and it was really distressing because he was 6 years old. He clearly wasn't awake as we had first suspected. He wasn't waking up with a bad dream. He was still asleep, even though his eyes were open and he was running up and down the room and he looked completely awake. He wasn't, because he had no recollection of it the next day at all. So he couldn't remember being out of bed at all. He didn't remember, it's good that he didn't remember feeling scared, but he didn't remember having been even out of bed at all.
And what impact did that have on you? Because that must have been quite terrifying for you, seeing him in that sort of what you thought was awake, but actually wasn't, when the realisation of that, seeing his behaviour.
Yeah, it is really upsetting. As a parent, you don't want to ever see your child upset or distressed, and certainly not appearing to be awake and actually functioning very differently. And so it was difficult. I think it had an impact in lots of ways. It had to be me or my husband at home. There were times of the week where we would have other things on in the evenings, and we might leave him with a babysitter occasionally, but we weren't able to do any of that because it had to be one or the other. If anybody else was in the house, Ethan massively reacted. So if we had people over for dinner one evening, he came down clearly having a night terror or whatever it was, and he didn't cope very well because there were different people in the room. When grandparents were here one weekend, he didn't cope very well because it wasn't me or my husband. So it had an impact in that way. My eldest son usually would be in bed by the time he woke up. It was usually around an hour after he went to bed. He would wake up, and that was when the night terror happened. So most of the time my eldest child had gone to bed in that hour, so he didn't see it. But he would attend Cubs once a week, and which meant that he had a slightly later bedtime than normal. And so on a couple of occasions he was here having, some dry cereal before going to bed after getting home from Cubs. And Ethan would wake up and come down. And the first time he thought it was funny because it looked like he was awake. But as soon as he started, to be really distressed, running up and down the room, he even jumped on the table a couple of times because he was just terrified to escape whatever he was feeling. My eldest son got really upset because he was like, he's not awake and I don't understand what's going on. So yeah, it did have an impact on everyone really. We had a slight breakthrough moment on one day where just before he was going, or I think it was just before he was going to bed, I asked him what he thinks about before as he's lying in bed just about to go to sleep. Is there something that he regularly thinks about or something that comes into his mind? I fully expected him to say, no, of course not. Like, he's 6 years old. Of course I don't think about what I'm thinking about before I go to bed. And he said, there is something that I think about every night. I was like, oh, okay. And he had watched, so he was 6, he'd watched Octonauts.
Okay.
So nothing scary. And there was one episode in Octonauts where a character had fallen through ice. And he had, I think he'd been in it for about 6 months. He had a cabin bed, so he's got a wardrobe and a desk underneath his bed, and he sleeps on the top. And where the screws are placed, there's like at one end, there was the tiniest slither of light that he'd spotted that he could see. I mean, it was absolutely fine. And it must have made some sort of connection in his mind that he decided that when he was about to go to sleep, he was lying still and he could fall through his bed. And so that was a massive part of why when he woke up, he just had to get out of his bedroom as quickly as possible. As soon as we discovered this, my husband put in like 4 massive screws with him so he could see what was going on. And then my husband, got onto the bed and jumped up and down on it to show him. So he was stood there, Ethan was eye level with it, Paul was jumping up and down on it to show that like it was not going anywhere, it was perfectly safe. And that did make a bit of difference, but I think by the time we kind of got to any sort of understanding, it just became a bit of a pattern as well. So he was still waking up every evening for a while, so I would say probably another 3 or 4 weeks every night after that point it was still happening.
So you unpacked it, if you like, with him, and that's a really clever question to ask actually. What do you think about before you go to sleep? It's generally what's in your mind, isn't it? You know, what have I got to do tomorrow? You know, as adults with our rational brain, when we look at a child's brain and how it's still developing at the age of 6, and how that limbic system, his brain is still really primitive and doesn't quite rationalise the world and won't rationalise that little hole in the bed as making that's absolutely fine. So by doing what you did and unpacking it and unpicking it with him, is saying, I could see things from your perspective, Ethan. Tell me what it is that's worrying you. And you made that connection between what he's feeling and what a rational adult would feel, and understood him, and that's probably why it had that impact a little bit to help him, and jumping on the bed showed him that,
it was safe.
It's safe. So that's really good, and that's what we would advise to do, is to understand, you know, the environment that he's sleeping in. Like you're saying, you looked at what is it, maybe it's because he's seen that episode of that cartoon and realised he's up high, he's not near the floor, and that falling feeling. So that makes a whole lot of logical sense by approaching it and understanding the world from his perspective. But it does have that massive impact, doesn't it?
You try so many different things, of course you do, and you look online and you talk to people and you try all sorts of different routines before bed, making sure that he's had warm milk and a banana before they go to sleep, so that all those, you know, there's so many different things that you can try. What we found with him was because he always came downstairs to us, he's got one big blanket, which is behind you, that he loves and brings real comfort. So if we held him close with his blanket and put Junior Bake Off, was his favourite thing at the time, on, he would slowly wake up. And because he was being held by us and he had his blanket round him and he was watching something he loved, he did very slowly, but did slowly relax and then wake up. He would remember the next day nothing before that, but would remember that he got to watch the signature round of the Junior Bake Off, and then he would it didn't scare him that he woke up downstairs, and he would just say, oh, did I have another night terrors? Like, yeah, you did. And then that would be it. He would go back to bed, and then he usually slept through. It was very rare that he had more than one in a night. It did happen occasionally, but it was very rare. If he were to have a second one, it was usually if we'd managed to keep him in his bedroom or get him to go straight back to bed. Then he sometimes would wait. Then sometimes he would have another one an hour or hour and a half later again. Whereas if he was being held by us with his blanket, then he didn't. And it's fascinating what worked, because he doesn't have them very often anymore. But since then, his, hobbies, interests have massively adjusted from baking to football.
Okay.
And when he had one recently, I put Junior Bake Off on, it didn't make any difference, and I put Match of the Day on, and he sat straight still and was like, oh, did I have another one? Like, oh yes, you did. And so it's just interesting that what actually helped him in those moments was very parallel with what his interests were at that time in his life. And their kids, they change all the time, don't they?
Yeah, and it's really insightful you notice that.
Yeah.
You know, you notice something by giving him that comfort and that physical containment.
He's very tactile as a person, always has been. Yeah.
Okay, so that blanket, that, you know, that's that common thing that he needed, that containment, not only from your words, but also physical containment to hold him and to keep him warm, and then putting something on that encouraged him to kind of recognise, oh, I really like that, is a really clever way of kind of getting into what is going on. Did he say, so the first time it happened, obviously it must be terrifying for you.
Yeah.
Did he say like the next day? Did you mention it? How did you approach it sort of the next day or the next couple of days after it happened?
I think when it first started, he was upset rather than distressed.
Okay.
So to begin with, we just were like, do you remember waking up with a bad dream? He's like, no, I didn't come downstairs. I was like, okay, you did come downstairs. You came and sat on my lap, and then we took you back to bed, but he hadn't remembered it. Okay. And then as his response to whatever was going on got more distressing, we asked him the same the next day, like, do you remember, was there anything that upset you? Do you remember having a bad dream in the night? Was there something that was going on? And he just couldn't, he would only remember anything that happened after he had woken up, but otherwise he didn't remember at all.